This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks, Vivian. So it looks like everyone who's on right now has their name listed except PW, and I'm trying to remember who that was from last time. We might have a few more folks join via phone, but we can jump in here and really before I get started, I'm not going to call everyone's name out for intros here. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your association. But does anyone, open floor, have any announcements they'd like to share with the group before jumping into the agenda here?
Hey, Megan, could you, the chat is disabled for me. Would you mind enabling the chat if I'm not mistaken?
If I know how to do that, let's see.
There, it looks like it's enabled now.
Oh, it is? Okay, I didn't do anything, so we'll see. Does anyone else have issues with the chat? Oh, there we go. Thanks, Vivian. Okay, so I can just start with an update of where we're at with the drought plan activation. Okay, thanks, Alice. This afternoon, we have the first meeting from the Agricultural Impacts Task Force. As a reminder, that is a group that is parallel to this group that will be looking at direct impacts to the agricultural sector for the current drought season. And really excited, you know, I don't have anything to report yet because it's this afternoon, but really excited about the team that Les and Kate Greenberg have pulled together for that meeting. We also have a CSU PhD student who Reagan Wascom has very kindly donated time to help managing that group, and she might actually join us on some future water availability calls or drought task force calls, and she's going to be a really helpful liaison. Her name is Nora Flynn, so if you see some emails from Nora Flynn from CSU, she is on the core drought task force team helping Kate Greenberg and I organize. And she also might be doing some direct reach out to producers and folks on the ground. Hi, Bill. Thanks for the introduction there. So we don't have another drought task force meeting scheduled at the moment. We're going to kind of wait and see what happens this afternoon and when the next update to that larger group would be. And also wanted to just hear the updates from NRCS and Colorado Climate Center today. There's not any other specific announcements I have around activation. We've had a lot of media reach out, just standard, want to know what's going on and how this drought is different from 2018, which is actually something I might bring back to this group for the next agenda to see if we can start to dig into really what those differences are and where we're experiencing, the state's experiencing impacts. I can kick it off. Let me see, switching back to the list here. Do we have, oh, Peter, are you taking the lead today for the report?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm going to give you presentation abilities there, and we can really jump into your report unless anyone has any other questions. We also have some time for discussion at the end.
Give me just a minute here, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Then, let's see, I'll share this screen because that's the one that's going to come up on. Go ahead and share. So now you should be seeing my have a great meeting, go to meeting thing, right?
Sure are.
All right. And then now you can see my slides.
Perfect.
Great. All right. We good for me to just dive in here?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the the quick heads up here, but yes, we're ready.
No, no problem whatsoever. So I think I was on the agenda for 40 minutes. May not take quite that long. We'll see. We may get a little bit ahead of schedule here. Yeah, I'm just going to motor on through, but please feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions. Missing meeting you all in person. Hope you're all hanging in there. I'm worried that I'm just going to be adding more bad news to the pile, but I think that there's a little bit of silver lining here, especially in at the end. So we're going to start with the normal temperature precipitation update for the state of Colorado. Then we'll take a closer look at the US Drought Monitor and talk about some of the surface water supply and energy balance measures that we're looking at. And then we'll jump into the outlook. So without further ado, here is a look back at June for the state of Colorado. Here we're looking at a contiguous US-wide map of June temperatures ranked out of the historical record going back to 1895. So we were the 16th warmest in June, which puts us much above average, or between the 80th and 90th percentile throughout that historical record for the state of Colorado as a whole. I do think, particularly in summer, it's fair to question the relevance of this entire historical record in a warming climate. With reference to the last 10 years, we were actually pretty par for the course for the state as a whole, certainly with some very warm spots. But let's see, June of 2018, 16, 13, and 12 were all warmer. So fifth out of the last 10 years. So here's a breakdown of how temperatures have looked over the last 3 months for the state as a whole. And we see that we're much above average over the southwest portion of the state and much of the southern portion of the state. Near normal in the northeast corner of the state, but that's not the result of 3 normal months. That is the result of a cool April and a much warmer than normal June, sort of canceling each other out. And it's worth noting as well that warm June in 2020 was also a windy June. So here is the June 2020 spatial temperature distribution. So we see that much of the Eastern Plains was in that top 10 percentile ranking for the entire historical distribution. We don't see any record warmest on the map, but we definitely see a lot of above average. Most of the state in the top tercile there, or the top 33% of years. And then if we just look at the month of July to date, temperature-wise, we see that we've continued to be warm for most of the state. It looks like there's a bit of an exception there in the North Park Valley as well as the Upper Gunnison Valley, but particularly along the Eastern Plains and most notably just east of the urban corridor, we see much warmer than normal July. So if you were to compare this to a year like 2012 that we know was super warm, you would see that most of the state has at least been cooler than 2012, but you could probably pick out a few examples just east of the urban corridor where it has been just as warm. In western Colorado, again, warmer than average for the month to date, but July 2018 was much warmer. Of course, that's comparing to some pretty extreme company. So overall, definitely warmer than normal. Now we're going to take a look at precipitation. And here we're looking again at that conus-wide view where we see we were the 53rd driest in that historical record of 126 years. So that puts us on a little bit of the dry side of the average range, but the average range nonetheless. What I want to draw your attention to here is if we look at that right-hand most column for all the months in the water year to date, we see one above average month in December, but that was still only the 41st wettest. And then we see a lot of average and below, with even a much below sprinkled in there. And I think that is really an important part of the narrative in this 2020 drought, is that while our eyes kind of gravitate naturally to the extremes when we look at climate maps, for much of the state, the story has been more just slowly slipping further and further behind the average. So we haven't seen any of those good drought busters that really hit a lot of the state in quite some time. Here's the spatial breakdown of percent of normal precipitation for the state of Colorado. And you can see we have a couple wet spots, particularly right along the state line with Utah. Things were on the wetter side of normal. And then we can pick out a few splotches that were wetter than normal, such as up near, I think that's Red Mountain Pass, that's the divider between Ouray County and San Juan County, as well as some of the area over the Collegiate Peaks and Elk Mountain Range. And then if we look at the Eastern Plains, Los Animas County had some good thunderstorms as well. But again, most of the state we would see are on the drier side of average, particularly the Eastern Plains. Most of it stands out as being drier than normal. And here's a look back at the water year to date. So this is where I was talking about slipping slowly further and further behind the average. So this map, I think the spatial pattern looks a lot like it did at the end of April. Not much has changed in terms of the spatial pattern there, where the North Central Rockies are overall doing the best for the water year to date, as well as the northern part of the urban corridor north of the Palmer Divide. But if you look at that green area, most of it is the light green, which if you pay attention to the color scale, that's only 91 to 110% of average. So it's easy to just take a quick glance at this map and think, oh, that area has been wet. But in fact, that area has just been average, and the rest of the state has been dry. And if you look at some areas like the San Luis Valley and the southeast corner of the state, in fact, it's been as low as 20 to 30% of average for the water year to date, which is disastrously dry. Here's the month of July to date. And of course, the most important thing to point out here is that we have seen some really nice convective systems or thunderstorm complexes that have rolled down the Arkansas River Valley and have led to some potential recovery there, where you're seeing totals in Bent County of 4 to 6 inches. That is certainly enough to make a positive impact. And even those 2 to 4 inch totals are going to help, but it's worth asking the question, you know, is it too little too late for dealing with some of these pre-existing drought agricultural impacts, particularly things like winter wheat, where, you know, our harvests are right around this time of year, if not a little bit earlier? Or is it too late for getting the forage production that you need? If you're a rancher, this is probably on that too little too late side, even though it is definitely a positive impact. Here we're looking at the standardized precipitation indices. So here we're taking a look at how anomalous precipitation has been at some of our long-term weather stations across the state, and we've matched the standardized precipitation indices to the corresponding U.S. drought monitor categories. For instance, if your SPI is below, I believe it's 2.05, that would put you in that D4 range, and then it's something like minus 1.65 to 2.05 for D3, and so on. But if we look at just the last 30 days, we can see, again, for the most part, the state has leaned dry. There's some positive pockets there, but the majority of the state has been on the drier side over the last 30 days. I believe Russ was pointing out the other day that Akron 4 East, which is one of our best long-term co-op stations on the Eastern Plains, was record dry over that time period. And then if we back out to the last 90 days of accumulation, again, we see widespread dry. You do see the influence in the Arkansas River Valley of that recent precipitation, where you have some stations in the normal range on that time scale. Although when we back out further, you'll see that they go dry as well. And then we can just see, looking at the Northeast Plains, how some of the more extreme drought conditions are starting to shift from the south up north. Here we back out to 6 months, and you see the big dry spots in the San Juans and southwest Colorado, as well as the eastern plains. And then 12-month, again, you see that basically the entire state is leaning dry, with a few areas in the normal range, but almost nowhere that's leaning wet. It's worth noting that we have reached the point where the great snow season and wet spring that we had in 2019 is outside of our 12-month period of record here. So we haven't seen much, if anything in the way of big statewide type drought buster events really since that's 2019 spring, when we saw a number of them. All right, so now let's take a look at the US Drought Monitor map and see how things are evolving. Here is the, so that's the national map from last week, but I have pulled up for the state the most recent map, which was updated as of this morning. And you can see that there is now D3 showing up in Northeast Colorado. That's new. Also, Megan was mentioning earlier, talking about how 2012 may be different than 2018. I would argue that one of the biggest differences is if you look at Northeast Colorado, where in 2018 things were disastrous for sure over much, if not all, of the southern portion of the state, but the northeast corner of the state was the kind of lucky wet corner in 2018. 2012 in the northeast portion of the state, I think, has been pretty clearly the worst year that we've seen since 2012, so the worst in the last 8 years anyway. And then if we look at how things have changed over the last month, we can see that drought conditions have somewhat shifted to incorporate more of northern Colorado, but we've seen some improvements mainly over the past week in southeastern Colorado. So some improvements, but still behind in southeast Colorado, degradations in northeast Colorado, and just steadily bad in western Colorado, where from month to month, maybe we haven't seen as much in terms of extremes with hot and dry, but it's been consistently hot and dry for a while now, at least since April. Here is a quick look at the evaporative demand drought index for the last 3 months, ending just a week ago. So this is just a reminder that the water balance is not just a function of temperature and precipitation, but the evaporative demand is also driven by winds, which we've certainly seen on the eastern plains, as well as surface humidity and cloud cover. And we can see D3 level, or 95th percentile and above, evaporative demand across much of the northeast corner of the state over the last 3 months. And then we also see that high evaporative demand over the San Juan mountain range and some of the central Rockies. Here's a quick look at, I believe this is the VegDry index, which is a satellite derived product that is basically looking at how well plants are photosynthesizing is the main way that these data are derived, although it does include some climate indicators as well. But you also see this bullseye of very dry conditions showing up as moderate to extreme drought in the northeast corner of the state, as I've talked about how things are shifting that way. Here's a quick look at some of our coagment station water balances. So these accumulations start on April 1st. They're not plotted until the beginning of May, but here we're looking at the evaporative demand, or the potential ET, that we've seen at the Burlington station in eastern Colorado. So I'm just using this as an indicator station. And then the water balance, which is precipitation minus potential ET, which we expect to be negative, but we can see from the blue line that it's more negative than in most years. So on the left-hand side, we're comparing just potential ET of all years. So each gray line is a trace from a previous year. The black line is the average, and then the red is the highest year on record. The green year is the lowest year on record, which was actually just last year. And then here's an example from western Colorado, where we're challenging our records, which the maximum potential ET goes back to 1994. But then if you include precipitation in that water balance, you see that we're challenging the record from 2018, or just 2 years ago. So that's where comparing things to 2018, I would argue that in a lot of ways, this 2020 drought is very similar to 2018 in Southwest Colorado. You could probably argue that 2018 was worse because the snowpack was so much worse that year. But with the combination of the lack of monsoon last year leading into the snow season, and then the hot, dry spring this year, things are still hurting pretty badly in Southwest Colorado. And then here's a look at water balance from a couple of our indicator agricultural weather stations, doing things just a little bit of a different way. So here we're looking at precipitation over potential ET rather than precipitation minus potential ET. Basically, this computation just puts a little bit more emphasis on the precipitation for semi-arid climates. So I would argue that in some ways this is a better tool, because I think that an inch of, for instance, if we had 4 inches of precipitation and 8 inches of potential ET, that would be more helpful for our state than 1 inch of precipitation and 4 inches of potential ET. Anyways, I won't go down that rabbit hole any further, but just point out that this is one of our more positive leaning indicators in the state, with the exception of that Dove Creek station, which is showing record low water balance, but it's still showing things leaning dry for the most part, except for Rocky Ford, but it's not showing things leaning as dry as most of our other products are right now. Here is a quick look at a new soil moisture product that our office is putting out. So here we're looking at available plant water in the top 10 centimeters on the left-hand side of your screen there. So basically this is showing the amount of water in the top 10 centimeters or 4 inches of soil that we think is available for plants to use for transpiration. Again, in centimeters, so 4 centimeters in the top, 4 centimeters of available plant water in the top centimeters would be a high value, and then of course we know that if it's near 0, that's obviously a low value, because that would be the floor. We can see how recent thunderstorms in areas like Los Animas County and El Paso County have recharged the shallow soil profile, whereas throughout much of western Colorado, there hasn't been recent moisture. And if we look at the percentile ranking on the right-hand side, we see that things are generally in pretty bad shape. And again, the percentiles that you see, there's no key there, but it is designed again to match the US Drought Monitor. So if it's in red or burgundy, it's bottom 5 percentile. If it's in orange, it's bottom 10 percentile. And so I wanted to bring this up to show how in some areas like southeastern Colorado, our models are showing that we've recharged shallow soils. But then if we look at deeper soils, or the top meter of soil moisture, we see that things are again looking bad across most of the state. I would say that this is probably one of our worst leaning indicators that I could find. And the reason I say that is you see a number of areas that are shaded in that darker red or burgundy, and that indicates that they're the driest on record in terms of the top meter soil moisture going back to 1980. And that's rather shocking, because dark red really means drier than 2002, 2012, 2018. So the number of patches you see that fit that description when looking at the soil moisture model are pretty eye-catching. And then if we look at the USDA.
Hey, Peter. This is Hi, Peter. This is Tracy. I just wanted to ask a question about that last slide you were showing about the moisture, soil moisture.
Yes.
Do you think this would be a relevant indicator for the Ag Impact Task Force to look at? Is this indicative of impacts on maybe dry land agriculture? If not, probably not irrigated agriculture.
I would think that this would be a good indicator to use for dryland agriculture. Certainly, if it's working well, that's what I'd like to see it used for. So I would love to share it with them. You know, if folks in the field look at it and say, hey, that's out to lunch, then I'll certainly take that feedback in mind. But I am hopeful that it would be a good tool for dryland ag. That's a great point.
Yeah, and so it's a new, I mean, your comment about it's out to lunch, is that because it's a new indicator, a new product you guys are creating and haven't had a chance yet?
Out to lunch. I think it's likely a good product, but if people who are actually in the fields in eastern Colorado are saying that they either have questions about the appraisal or cast doubt on it, I would be interested to listen to their feedback because it's new. But I'm hoping it's pretty accurate.
Okay, hey, thanks for that.
Yeah, you bet. And I was just showing this next slide to sort of validate the model, where I'm looking at the USDA appraisals of soil moisture, which are based on actual observations, which are showing that our topsoil is 71% short or very short in the state of Colorado. All right, so that's it for the current update. With that, I will go into the outlook, where we have a mix of good and bad news, but there is some silver lining here. And the silver lining is this: looking at the next 7 days, it looks like we got a good surge of monsoonal moisture on tap. So some of those QPF values that you see in the San Juans and Sangre de Cristos are certainly pretty eye-catching. What it's looking like is we've got a surge of more moisture-laden air that's being ushered in from the Gulf of Mexico, and it looks like we'll have some great chances for afternoon thunderstorms over much of the southern Rockies over the next 3 days. You can also see pretty widespread precipitation forecast over the eastern plains and Front Range. I think that's more Sunday into Monday. It looks like there could be a cold front that comes through with actually some good moisture behind it, where we could get some good post-frontal upslope Sunday into Monday. But all in all, lots of chances for afternoon thunderstorms over the next week. I would say this is the kind of week that Kevin keeps his eye out for, because there's definitely potential for flash flooding. This is not going to be steady, gentle rain. It's going to be a lot of single isolated thunderstorms or thunderstorm complexes. So there's certainly going to be some potential for flash flooding over the next week. I would be surprised if we don't see it anywhere. And I'm definitely looking at the San Juans and Sangre de Cristos, just with how high those QPF totals are. I will say it's this QPF tends to lean conservative, but for whatever week, this is showing a little higher precipitation forecast than the numerical models that I've looked at. So it may be a bit on the bullish side for the forecast this week, particularly actually in the northern part of the state, where there seems to be a little bit more consensus around good precipitation in the southern portion of the state. Perhaps that's because the moisture has basically already arrived. So here's a look at things with reference to the monsoon. The figure in the upper right-hand corner there is showing dew points at Phoenix Sky Harbor going back to June 1st. So the red line is the climatological average. The green line is the 55-degree benchmark that they tend to use to measure the start and end of monsoon season. And then the blue line that jumps around a lot, which it's completely normal for it to jump around like that, is the observations. So you can monsoon has been a little bit slower than normal to get started if you're using this metric, but it's here now. And if we look at the QPF more zoomed out, we can see there's this nice jet of subtropical moisture that's right along the Gulf. And when you have good daytime surface heating over the desert Southwest, it creates a low pressure at the surface and acts to usher in some of that moisture when you have it available. And we certainly do have it available in spades right now. So that's expected to come up into Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado and give us hopefully some nice soakings in areas that need it over the next week. Here is a look at the Climate Prediction Center's 8 to 14 day outlook. You can see that we're still leaning on the warm side of normal, And we're also leaning for much of the state back towards the drier side of normal, but you do see that it shows the monsoon keeps cranking potentially in Arizona, going up into Utah, and maybe hitting the southwest corner of Colorado. So if the rest of the state has to be dry, we would certainly take that. Again, with the precipitation though, these aren't big tilts from near normal. If you're only seeing one color shading, that means that confidence really isn't that high. Same goes for temperature, where there's a little bit more of a convincing tilt for the northern end of the state, but pretty close to near normal there. Here is our seasonal outlook for August, September, October, and this is where the bad news kind of comes back into play. For August, September, October, we see that much of the desert Southwest, including up into Colorado, has a pretty convincing tilt towards increased odds for above normal temperatures. And if we look at the precipitation side, we see a bit of a tilt towards below normal precip that's got a bullseye over Colorado, which is discouraging to see. If we look at the temperature side of things, this is influenced by dynamical models, but it's strongly just driven by trend. And I'll talk a little bit more about why you can get such a strong signal from trend in just a couple slides here, particularly this time of year. I'll talk a little bit about El Nino and that situation in a couple slides as well, but I don't believe that El Nino has a clear impact on where things are now. So I would say that forecast is mainly banking on trend. I dug into the CPC forecast discussions for why we're looking at an increased chance of below normal precipitation over the next 3 months. And one of the big things cited was soil moisture anomalies, that our soil moisture is low, as I've just shown with that graphic a couple slides ago. And when your soil moisture is low, sometimes that can lead to a positive feedback, as it's called, or kind of a vicious cycle where you don't have as much water to evaporate. If you can't evaporate as much water, then you don't expect as much to precipitate out. Now, I've done some research into, this was actually a lot of what my master's thesis was about, was looking at that feedback between soil moisture and temperature or precipitation. And if soil moisture is what they're citing for increased chance of below normal precipitation, I'm super skeptical, because this is the time of year where, being in a semi-arid climate, we expect our soil moisture to be low for much of the state. Even in a normal year, it is lower than normal. But the big point here is that the majority of precipitation that we get this time of year is not locally sourced. That's to say, it comes from somewhere like the Gulf of Mexico or the Eastern Pacific, or even the oftentimes in eastern Colorado, our summer precipitation will come from when we get a little bit of that sticky, humid air from the Central Plains, that's moisture evaporating off of cornfields. So oftentimes it's not real locally sourced. So I'm not sure I'm putting a lot of stock into this. Russ was saying the other day, when I was asking about reasons why this was below normal, that the CPC got quite burned on the forecast the last 2 years with the monsoon, where they said it would be good or normal, and it was really bad. So yeah, how do I put CPC's track record recently during monsoon season politely? Well, bad. So there's hope. The panels here on the right-hand side, if you look at the two rightmost panels, the upper right is showing CPC's forecast for August, September, October 2019. The lower right is showing the observations, and they did nail that wet area in the Dakotas and Nebraska, but they missed the lack of a monsoon, or non-soon as it got called, which really had an impact all the way up into eastern Colorado. So now I want to take a look at some of our precipitation projections for some of our indicator stations from these climate subregions that were developed by Klaus Wolter. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Fort Collins in Region 8 and work our way around the state counterclockwise all the way back to Boulder, also in Region 8. So the main thing to point out here is just that even if we get wetter than normal conditions over the next couple months, it's unlikely that we'll make up the deficits that we've built since the beginning of the water year at most of these stations. So here the solid black line is our accumulation for the water year to date. The dashed black line is the average, and then all those gray lines are traces from years past. The purple line is an above average projection. The orange line is below average. One thing that I think that you may find confusing on these graphics is that with not much season left, the average projection tends to trend pretty close to the above average projection. What's going on there is, being in thunderstorm season, our precipitation distribution tends to be a little bit skewed. That is to say that our mean precipitation, which is responsible for the average projection, is higher than the median. And you can see why if you look at traces like that 2013 one that jumps off the chart, how the average can get a little bit skewed by some of those really anomalously high years. At any rate, most of our traces don't make up the deficit for Fort Collins. We're at 10.9 inches for the water year to date, and our average by this point is 12.5 inches. So we've got some ground to make up. Similar situation if we look at Steamboat Springs, and even here there's fewer traces that would get us back to normal, and the above average projection doesn't get us back to normal. If we look at Grand Junction, we're the 13th driest on record for the water year to date, and that's a 118-year record, so certainly on the low side there. And then if we look at Mesa Verde, we see that we're the 4th driest on record, and none of our traces get us back to normal, even though this is going back into more the wet season for Mesa Verde. Still better than 2018. So I'm not sure if that's really a silver lining or if that tells us just how bad the long-term situation is, that, you know, we had that reprieve in spring of 2019, but that's bookended by 2 extremely dry years in southwest Colorado. Alamosa is the 9th driest on record for the water year to date, with just 2.58 inches for the water year to date, which of course the San Luis Valley is the driest part of the state, and you could argue that there the more important point is how did the snowpack around the valley do, which was also fairly low this year, and we're just at 54% of average. Pueblo, at the Pueblo Memorial Airport, we started the water year in pretty good shape, but you can see that things are supposed to ramp up starting in April, and the wet season really goes through August in Pueblo. We haven't had much of a wet season, so things have really fallen behind normal at just 4.49 inches, as opposed to an average of 8.8 inches, 7th driest on record. If we go out to the southeast corner of the state, you see just how much recovery we've had in the last few weeks. In terms of precipitation, things have been on the wetter end of normal over the last 30 days, but if you compare that to overall just how dry the water year has been to date, it's still fairly discouraging, with only a few traces that would get us back to normal, certainly not the above normal precipitation projection, which I believe is just the 66th percentile. Akron 4 East, you can see just how things have shut off recently. We're actually slightly lower than water year 2012 was at this point, which is pretty crazy to say. We had a promising start to the wet season, with a wet period at the end of April, beginning of May, and even another nice storm at the beginning of June. But since then, the tap has shut off, and that's not what's supposed to happen this time of year. And then if we wind our way back to the Boulder, Boulder is that bubble that is the lone wet spot in the state. It's kind of the Boulder, Longmont, and I would argue it goes up to Berthoud bubble, where things are above normal, and even the below normal projection gives us an average year. So a pretty stark contrast from a lot of what we've seen. Okay, I was talking, this slide is kind of out of order here, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I was talking about how the above normal forecast is being driven largely by trend this time of year. That's not necessarily because we've warmed more in the late summer and early fall in the state of Colorado, but because it's when natural variability is at its lowest. So the blue line here corresponds to 2 standard deviations of temperature variability statewide for each season. So each point on the x-axis here is showing 1 3-month period from November, December, January, all the way through October, November, December. And what we can see is we have the least natural variability, basically July, August, September, and August, September, October. So if you have a warming trend that's close to equal across the year, you can be most confident that that's going to drive the seasonal forecast in the time of year where your variability is the lowest, and least confident in the late winter and early spring when variability is the highest. As far as how Augusts have gone for us recently, looking forward, Augusts have certainly trended warm, as have every month, but we can see if we look at precipitation that things are kind of all over the map. We see the last 3 have been a little bit below normal, but basically anything can happen based on trend alone. So like I said earlier, I don't think that the ENSO situation has a clear much of anything to do with our current situation, being in the time of year that ENSO tends to impact the least, and also being in neutral conditions. But looking forward, I think that the thing that we can say most clearly is certainly for the first half of the cold season, El Nino conditions are quite unlikely. Models are leaning towards either a La Nina year or a neutral year. So here on the left-hand plot, we see that for the fall time frame, we have a little bit above a 50% chance of a developing La Nina. There's one model anyway that leans us towards a strong La Nina. Most of them would lean us towards a weaker La Nina for at least the first part of the cold season. That's potentially beneficial for the northwest portion of the state and the higher elevations of the state, where our Colorado Rockies do tend to be wetter in La Nina winters than El Nino winters. Whereas if we look at spring, summer, that's when things tend to flip, and El Nino conditions tend to be preferred for higher precipitation. So just in summary here, Colorado has spent much of water year 2020 falling behind slowly. In parts of the state, you could certainly argue that it hasn't fallen behind slowly at all, just thinking of what's happened in Akron over the last 30 days. But for the state as a whole, that's not a bad narrative. The rain recently in southeast Colorado has certainly been welcome, but for many ag applications, it's probably too little too late. Drought conditions are shifting, where we're seeing over the last month, northeast Colorado is critically dry, and in indicators such as soil moisture and that remotely sensed vegetation indicator, we're seeing that things are looking worse in the northeast corner of the state than anywhere else right now. Expect warmer than average temperatures to continue based on forecasts. In the late summer is when our warming trend is the least escapable of any time of year. However, I would say the general rule of thumb is the wetter things are in Colorado, the cooler they are. So certainly near normal temperatures in August are possible if we get a few nice wet weeks like it looks like we might get this week, but I would certainly bet against a cooler than normal August. And then the monsoon's been a little slow to start, but it looks like we're going to see a good surge in the next week. Hopefully it's the first of a few, but we will have to keep our eye out for flash flooding that's definitely possible when you see a QPF like we've got this week. And then I wouldn't put a whole lot of weight on that precipitation forecast right now. I'd rather see it equal chances than below normal. The models may know something, but it's really pretty low confidence. So I'm at least hopeful that, especially with this next week giving us some moisture, if they're really banking on soil moisture as the rationale for below normal precip, that things are more equal chances than may be shown. And then looking further forward, El Nino is unlikely this winter, but a neutral or La Nina-like early winter and fall is certainly possible, and this probably favors, as I said, northwest Colorado. So thanks, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions at this point if folks want to chime in.
Peter. I have a quick question about the soil moisture indicators that you all developed that you showed. I was wondering if you could paste any links or papers that maybe describe how you all developed that. Is that featured on your website right now? Those soil moisture, the top 10 centimeter maps?
So the soil moisture maps are featured on our website. I could do a short write-up as to how it's developed. It's not a peer-reviewed product, so I mean, what I will say is the data come from a model that is well peer-reviewed. So I could link to that model. So it's not a completely developed in-house model. So it's not like we developed a new model in-house and put it through no peer reviewer and are expecting people to trust it. That's not the case. Basically, what we're doing is taking well peer-reviewed models and then packaging it in a different way that we feel like is most useful for drought monitoring in Colorado. Just making it more of a product.
Thanks. Yeah, I do think the Ag Impact Task Force is going to be interested in looking at those. So thanks for sharing. Are there questions for Peter?
Hey, Peter, this is Kevin. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So first of all, I want to say that was one of your best presentations. Great job. I liked some of the new data that you put in there and the explanation behind a lot of the things.
Thank you.
As far as anybody that knows me knows that I start getting really twitchy around the last week of July and the first week of August. It's always been kind of the 2-week period that makes me the most nervous for flash floods. And I don't think your presentation set my mind at ease in regards to that. But my question for you, and I now wish I had stopped you back when you were on that 7-day forecast. I don't know if you can go back to that or if we just want to talk through it. You were showing in the San Juans and down in the Sangre de Cristo some really high numbers there. I think
yes.
I see it right there. 5 inches in the Sangres, over 6, almost 7 in the San Juans. That's a lot for even a 7-day period, but I guess I wanted to drill into this and say, are you expecting a lot of this to fall over a 1 or 2-day period, or do you think that this is kind of a gradually accumulating over the 7 days?
Yeah, there I can set your mind at ease just a little bit. Couple things here. I do think that it is a little bit more gradual. I think that the next 3 days look like they're probably the bigger days of the period for the southern portion of the region, whereas the bigger period for the eastern plains and even urban corridor is probably late this weekend into next week. The other thing I'll say about just these QPF maps, the way that they're done, is there's obviously a lot of fitting to the terrain. So it tends to put the highest bullseyes over the highest terrain. And sometimes when you have large precipitation amounts forecasted in general, it'll really show some eye-popping numbers over our 14ers. And especially, that's more reliable that things will fall according to where the high terrain is in the winter when we have more winter and springtime weather systems coming through. In the summer, that's a little bit less reliable. I mean, a lot of these thunderstorms are going to develop over the high terrain, but depending on the flow in the upper atmosphere, where the big totals fall, I think is going to vary from day to day. And I think on any given day over these next few days, there's potential for some heavier numbers at places in southern Colorado, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to fit the terrain quite as evenly as what's shown by this QPF. And I would expect that that would also mean that the highest 7-day totals might not be quite as high as what's shown here. I see that Russ is also listed as on the call. If there's anything that I said that was out of line there, you're welcome to chime in here.
No, that seems about right. It's, I've just been poking around the models a little bit here too, and I mean, you're right. There really aren't any individual models that are showing that much. Everything is wet, so I think that part is pretty well founded there. But right, there aren't any like individual models really on this 6 to 7 inches over the next week. So I'm not exactly sure where, the details of the forecast to those specific numbers, but it does, it fits it to the terrain and the climatology. So it seems like, pretty high confidence in some heavy rain chances in those areas for sure, but I'm not sure I'd bet a lot of money on there being widespread 6+ inches or something in the San Juans.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, I just looking at this map, I think it's great news for the Eastern Plains as I see that, and probably the San Luis Valley as well. I still think where my concerns lie is that a lot of these bullseye areas are right near burn scars, and
yeah.
I may have to have some calls with some emergency managers after seeing this map. But yeah, I suppose this is good news from a water standpoint. This is one of the biggest maps I've seen in years for the state right here. So I actually hope it comes true without any floods.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
I was mentioning that we haven't had any big statewide drought busters in a while. This is probably the best statewide QPF map that we've seen maybe since last May.
And Kevin, I definitely agree with your concern about like the 416 and Deckers and spring burn scars being probably the primary worry over the next week or so.
Okay, any other, I hear that too, Cindy. Kevin's voice always kind of sounds like that. Any other questions for Peter while we have him? I don't know if you saw that in the chat, Peter, but folks, myself included, were really impressed with this presentation. And it's really helpful to hear your relative confidence in different maps and the background behind, yeah, just the difference between trends and the models that are informing these. So thank you very much. And please do upload this presentation to our shared drive, because I will likely be using some of these maps this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, well, we're nearly on schedule, and next up we have the NRCS.
Are you able to take the screen away from me, or do I have to pass it back?
I think I can just take it from you and pass it to Brian.
Okay.
Let's see if that works. Yes. Yes, there.
Megan?
Yep.
Megan, this is Cindy Lair, and I just wanted to mention to Peter, with those new tools that you're talking about for the deeper soil moisture, and then also the plant available soil moisture, if there's anything that we could do with the conservation districts and even the in our partner, I know Brian's on the call too, so I don't want to speak for NRCS. However, just trying to get more more feedback on ground truthing that. I think that would be a really neat project to work with them and to request their assistance in that. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think they're going to like being able to help you strengthen that tool because that is really
Okay.
beneficial for agriculture.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think that would be a wonderful partnership, and I think we should talk more about how to do it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Brian, you are all set up. We can see your slides, so floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I echo Kevin's and many other comments that Peter, that was a spectacular presentation. It's going to be a hard one to follow. And as always, you say it extremely elegantly. So thank you. Yeah, you brought up some really good maps that really did a great job of highlighting what we're seeing as well in terms of dryness in particular locations. One area I will mention really quickly, I think deserves a little bit of attention. Is the dryness in the northwest corner of the state. And I was a little bit sad to see that after the dryness that we've seen in July in the Yampa and White combined basins and the dryness in June, your 7-day forecast did not bring much relief to them in that forecast and potentially not much further. However, I thought it was a positive long-term outlook that, of course, a neutral or La Nina year could help out northwest corner of the state. At the end of the presentation, I will post a link or two to the chat box to provide everyone with a link to our interactive charts, which will actually allow users to look at graphs extremely similar to, or very similar, I should say, to the precipitation graphs that Peter showed at the end of the presentation, the projection graphs. I'll pass out some links to that, and you guys can go to our website and you can turn on or off particular years, the projection of that particular year, for example, from now through the end of the year, and then you can also turn it on and off historical years. Observation or cumulative precip observations at basins with snowtail sites or just snowtails. So look forward to something to use and interact with here at the end of the presentation. But exactly as Peter said, I'm going to take his words. I'm going to motor through this presentation. As always, do not hesitate to interrupt me if you have questions or concerns. So I am going to try and go through this maybe a little bit faster than usual in order to highlight some of those projection and interactive charts that we have. This graph is simply just a reminder of the snowpack that we had this year. I did not update this yesterday. You can just see it's still here set on June 22nd, but of course snowpack didn't change since June 22nd. The reminder being that snowpack this year was close to normal across much of the state, thankfully. However, a good snowpack year on the heels of a dry fall and then followed by a dry spring make for the conditions that Peter has highlighted and that I'm going to highlight here in a little bit. So. Okay, so here's what I was talking about in the northwest corner of the state. June precipitation at our snowtails in the combined Yampa and White Basin saw 53% of normal precipitation, whereas unfortunately July has pretty much seen no precipitation at our snowtail sites. And you might notice that this graph is a little bit different than normal. Usually the zero level is down here. However, the product expects that there would be no zero precipitation or at its negative precipitation I did not do any data prior to kicking this presentation out, save for one, which I'll get to here in a little bit. But what has happened is that a lot of our precipitation gauges will register some actual evaporation when they really shouldn't. And that evaporation is likely what is showing up in these negative values here. So you see that there's nothing for the addition of July. This is what average July precipitation is. And unfortunately here, the negative winds up showing up in the bottom. So again, no precipitation. And one quick comment aside from the presentation, my computer and connection can cut out at times. I believe it shouldn't necessarily affect my ability to present, and hopefully it's not affecting anybody's ability to hear me. Can you guys still hear me? And has it been a pretty 100% you've been able to hear me the entire time?
It cut out briefly, but it was short. So I'll alert you if it's too long. But
excellent.
great.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, I'll continue to go on as if little cutouts won't affect the end product here. So here again, you can see that there have been some precipitation accumulation at various sites in the upper Yampa and White, and then also in the North Platte as well. A little bit of precipitation accumulation, but in general, much of it is zero, and maybe with some data edits, we would have seen maybe 1/10 of an inch of cumulative precipitation in the combined Yampa White, but in effect, let's be honest, it's been dry there. Again, here in the year-to-date total precipitation in the combined basins, you can see that things have been quite dry, much drier than normal, which is the yellow and purple line average. I'm just going to go ahead and try and use average a little bit more consistently here. When referring to precipitation, again, we've been below normal, below average, forgive me, habit. And you can see that there was a slight dip, probably due to some evaporation there. Just a quick reminder on what streamflow forecasts were June 1. We, of course, do not produce streamflow forecast on July 1 because the snowpack is pretty much gone. So, but I think it is worth a reminder. And reservoir storage, forgive me for not having a combined basin number there, but in general, you can see reservoir storage is above normal in the combined Yampa White, and you'll see another few depictions of that here in a number of graphics later in the presentation. All right, moving into the Colorado. June precipitation here was generally pretty good, 87%. However, again, July has been pretty dry. Peter had a graphic very early on in the presentation that showed central and southern Colorado showing relatively good precipitation through early July. And you'll see that these graphics here will draw that out in a different way here. But I thought that graphic was a particularly good high resolution precipitation graphic for July to date precipitation. Here we go again. Being as the Colorado River Basin, especially the western portion of it, is in the northern area of Colorado, it has been pretty dry as well, but still registering some precipitation through the beginning of July. Year-to-date precipitation, 84% of normal. And again, we see this, whoops, wrong way. We see this slight drop here, again, because of, likely because of evaporation and lack of data editing. Our crews have been out in the field maintaining snowtail sites over the last few weeks. And with COVID and everything, there's been a lot of extra measures and extra work that has gone into it. So Carl and Joel have not had an opportunity to edit the data, which is why we see some atypical drops in the data. But again, comparing to average, below normal and staying quite dry. Again, a reminder of streamflow forecasts. Again, forgive the lack of basin-wide number. I do have that in a map here at the end of the presentation, but nonetheless, reservoir storage quite good across the entire basin and at many of the reservoirs compared to the rest of the state, and more specifically compared to the southern portion of the state. And here again, you see that reservoir storage is above average. And with a look at history for the Colorado Basin of the combined reservoirs back to October 92. Okay, moving east into the South Platte, June precipitation was 100% of normal, and then unfortunately July precipitation has been 33% of normal. Last month's graphic here in this map showed the headwaters of the South Platte had really good precipitation here in this area above normal in June on the 22nd when I had last collected data. However, this month, again, another downturn. Again, Peter showed a great table in there where December precip and snowpack was pretty good, as was June. But other than that, precipitation across Colorado, particularly here in the mountains, has been poor. Year-to-date precipitation here, 94% of normal. But it seems that it is drying out. And it looks like there is a slight inflection in the average line here when the monsoon typically hits. Hopefully we will see that, and coincidentally, or somewhat coincidentally, I should say, that's what the 7-day outlook that Peter showed should hopefully provide a boost here. And then a little reminder of those stream flow forecasts as of June 1 for the South Platte. Reservoir storage in the South Platte, again, is good here in the northern half of the state, but here as we transition to the southern half, we'll see a change. And then here you can see that not only will we see a change as we go southward, but we are seeing that while reservoir storage was quite high at the end of last water year, we just haven't seen, we did not see the recharge that we would have liked to see in the fall of reservoirs in the combined South Platte Basin. Okay, getting to the southern half of the state in the Gunnison, here again, June precipitation, fortunately for the Gunnison, which really needed it, was at 100% of normal for June, but July precipitation was only 17% of normal so far as of yesterday morning. And then here, it looks like the Grand Mesa has seen some decent precipitation since the beginning of July, but unfortunately the rest of the basin, including the headwaters, have not. And like I kind of very lightly alluded to earlier, the Gunnison needed that June precipitation, mainly from this one slightly more wet period here, but that little boost was all that was needed to give it that near normal precipitation levels. But in general, looking at the last 3-month period and even more, it's been quite dry. So hopefully we will get that monsoonal moisture, that little inflection here that Peter and Russ were referring to. And then again, a reminder of the stream flow forecasts. Reservoir storage in the combined Gunnison is starting to dip. Many of the, well, I should say most of the reservoirs across the state are starting to dip down. And the Gunnison is definitely not an exception. And then this is what I'm talking about. Here's that that dip that we're seeing, more extreme than we just saw in the South Platte, and then a comparison to the long-term average, which is denoted by the black line there. Okay, moving to the southwest corner of the state, again, another location that was in great need of near average June precipitation. And sometimes I snicker a little bit because June precipitation is usually quite low, near about an inch, maybe a little bit more in some areas of the state, even in the mountains, is about what the normal is. Unfortunately, it was near normal, but it does wind up being a very little bit in the entire scheme of things. You can see June is the driest month, particularly here in the San Miguel, Dolores, Anima, San Juan basins. But it was near normal, and I should focus on the positives. However, July to date has only been 7% normal. Forgive the data outages here. As I was mentioning earlier, our crews are out, including Carl, working hard in the mountains, and there's a data trip that kind of goes on. And when I say trip, it trips some of the data sensors that blanks it out and we wind up getting all of these blank values, and with the guys being down there performing the maintenance. And I wasn't able to correct for that data in time because they're able to get so much done. But nonetheless, the message is still the same. It has been very dry. And there again, you can see in the year to date, again, there were so many sites that tripped out and tripped the thresholds that no value was reported for the year to date. But you can see even from the last few days that it's been extremely dry and nothing has changed over the last few days. Again, a reminder of the streamflow forecast from June 1, reservoir storage here down as well, looking at the individual major reservoirs that we calculate for. And then here's that dip. You can see from here down is the change since last month. Okay, moving east into the upper Rio Grande. June precipitation was 3/4 of average, and July, fortunately, as I was alluding to earlier in Peter's high resolution map graphic, we saw some of the better precipitation. We also saw some of the better presentation from Peter as well. That was a good slip up on my part. 53% of normal precipitation in the upper Rio Grande through this part of July. And there you can see it at some of the snowgel sites in the headwaters of the basin, mainly convective in nature. And then year to date, unfortunately, precipitation is only 64% of normal in the upper Rio Grande, but it looks like we did receive a little bit of a boost at those two sites. I think one of them was the upper Rio Grande site there just this month. Reminder of streamflow forecasts. Reservoir storage is the lowest in the state for the combined reservoirs in the upper Rio Grande basin. And that's the graphic that depicts them. And again, downward trend and below normal. About the beginning portion of July, there was a data error that popped up at Pueblo Reservoir. When the data was entered, a digit was mentioned. And it's amazing what one digit can do across reservoir storage for an entire basin, let alone an entire state. I noticed that that one digit error, there's the storage in Pueblo Reservoir is typically around 200,000 acre feet, and it had been about 20,000 acre feet. That drew the statewide total down, I think about 4 or 5 additional percentage points. So one little digit can make a big difference. Forgive me, I'll get to that here in a little bit. Precipitation through June in the Arkansas was 81% of normal, and July so far has been 61% of normal. And then just a few sites showing near normal precipitation. Everything else is well below. Year to date is 74 and quite dry, but better than some of the very stagnant or level year to date traces that we've been seeing. And again, a nice little boost as Peter was showing in July here in the last few weeks. An unfortunate reminder of streamflow forecast as of June. Yeah, Pueblo Reservoir was showing up down here, and unfortunately it's up near 120% of normal. So I'm glad that I was able to get that data error cleaned up and those graphics into this presentation because it makes quite a difference. And then not as dramatic a downturn with that data error removed. The Arkansas reservoirs are doing better than the Rio Grande are, fortunately. Okay, statewide. Again, a very quick reminder that snowpack was near normal. June precipitation, not too far below normal at 87%. However, July returned to dry, 38%. Statewide, you can see that there in the mountains, there were some areas of mainly southern Colorado that did see slightly better precipitation, very convective in nature, but it did make a slight difference in some of those areas in July. Year-to-date precipitation, 80% of normal, according to this graphic, for the entire state. But again, generally pretty dry over the last month or more. especially compared to the average value. And then according to this graphic, very slight difference, 81% of normal statewide precipitation. You can see again, it's still pretty dry in the south and southwest corner of the state. The Yampa White turning drier than it had been, but not a single basin is above normal for the mountain observation stations. Quick reminder of stream flow forecast there. Okay, so this is last month's reservoir storage. And then this is this month's reservoir storage. So we have a dip of 7% statewide. You can see the Yampa White combined basins only dipped 3%. However, they are getting very dry conditions up there, and the Rio Grande remains the lowest in the state at 55% of average combined reservoir storage. And here's a more time series type look at what each basin's combined reservoir storage has done since the beginning of the water year. And then the historical comparison of combined reservoir storage in Colorado here. This is the SWASI outlook for surface water supply index for Colorado, thanks to Department of Water Resources here. So yeah, real quick, I said it numerous times, June precipitation was near normal. Unfortunately, July has been below normal. The better precipitation was in the Arkansas and the Rio Grande through portions of July, but unfortunately, it really wasn't all that great and anything to really write home about. Water year precipitation is near 80 to 81% of average and down 3 percentage points from last month. And reservoir storage has fallen statewide, about 7% on average, and the Rio Grande is the lowest in the basin at 55% of normal. Okay, here real quick, I wanted to provide the link to the interactive charts. Let's see, everyone. And so this is the page that it'll take you to. Of course, snowpack graphs, graph number 1 and 3, you can use those. There's not much to report right now. But if you look at the graphs number 2 and 4, they are the precipitation graphs. The bottom one is a projection graph, a lot like what Peter was looking at, to look at entire basins. For example, you can click on the state of Colorado here, open chart. Actually, you know what, I'll change it. It's going to open up in another window. I'm going to actually highlight the projection graphs that Peter was showing. Make sure you find that other window. Here it just popped up for me. If we want to project 2013 on top of what we're seeing right now across the entire state, 2013 is probably not the best year to use, particularly in the South Platte, since that was I would argue it was an anomaly for precipitation accumulation through the end of the water year. But you can click on any one of these years and turn it on, and then all of a sudden you'll see that blue line there. Sorry, I can't hover over it with my mouse, but it pops up there. And you can see, much as Peter was saying, that through all the snowtail sites in Colorado, even if we get some of the best case scenario, for example, 2013, not to say that 2013 is the best improvement we would have seen since this time through the end of the year across the entire state. Nonetheless, even with that projection, we will not reach back to that average line for precipitation. So feel free to use these graphics and just see what potential outcomes may be for the rest of this year using the precipitation projection, or if you just want to have a look at what precipitation we've seen in the past through years, feel free to use this graphic right here. Again, click on the basin of interest and then open chart. And the same thing, you can turn on and off years and view those. And then lastly, if you are interested in individual sites, feel free to look at, go back a page, or actually I shouldn't say that, just go ahead and send me a message and I can send you the link to that. And with that, I think that's all that I have for today.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions about the presentation you just saw? Okay. Thanks. I enjoy using those maps a lot, and they're nice and colorful and updated compared to the last ones, or the old ones. Let's see. So on the agenda now we have the reports from water providers and reports from the impact task forces. We can just take, I'll just see for whoever wants to unmute and take the lead, or I can start calling out names if there's silence.
This is Swithin with Highlands Ranch.
Hi there.
So for both June and July, we're continuing to see above average demands. In June, it was 13% above average. So far for July, we're 15% above average. It is having an effect on our storage. We are down to about 73% of our total capacity, which is lower than we usually are at this point of the summer. With the call on where we don't have that much water coming in, we are pumping our deep groundwater wells. And I would say the conditions we're seeing in Highlands Ranch do verify with the drought monitors expansion or indication of D2 conditions for our area.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, this is John Hoare, City of Thornton. Like Swithin and probably everybody else, we're seeing increased water use over last year, which was pretty wet even into the summer. So month to date, July is 28.9% above last year, and year to date is 15.21% over last year. Our storage is sitting at 88%, which is really kind of normal for us because, of course, that's why you have reservoirs. You deplete them during the high water use. Stanley Lake is not full anymore. It's sitting at 98%, 98.5%, and is dropping. There's not enough flow in Clear Creek. The call is senior enough that we probably won't see Stanley Lake refill this year. We do not, at Thornton, we do not anticipate watering restrictions at this time, even though we're in drought, because of our storage. We're starting to get a little nervous about the message we should be sending to our customers, our ratepayers, and making sure that they understand that we're in drought and that that consumption is way up. So, but that's it. That's my report.
John, can you repeat how much above average your demands are?
Sure. This month is 28, so far 28.9% above last year, and year to date is 15.21% above last year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Emily. I'm just going to read Emily's report here, which she put in the chat, that her quick report for Northern Water is that Granby came close but did not fill, and Carter is at 96%, Horsetooth 86%, Granby at 98%, and Willow Creek also at 86% full. Thanks. Who would like to go next?
All right, hi everyone, Jason Feinhout from Denver Water. So just like everyone else, our demands are up, which is surprising. I mean, obviously hot and dry weather, but when you look at commercial office buildings, restaurants, hotels, DIA, I mean, things are way down water usage wise, but it's been more than made up for by single family, multifamily, residential. So we are seeing definitely an increase in demand in spite of all of the lower usage. And our reservoirs, they are at 95% full, and that's where they actually peaked. So we didn't fill this year. We're at 95%. Our average of this time of year is 96%. So we're not too far off the average, but definitely higher demand and did not fill this year. So that's our report.
Okay, any other? Let's see. Okay, we can do any impacts from CPW. I'm actually not seeing someone on the phone from CPW. What about DWR, Tracy, or others on the phone? Do you have any updates from your office?
This is Tracy. I don't have anything, but I saw that Bill Tyner is on our call from the Arkansas Basin, and he might have some things to report.
I might just mention with respect to storage in the Arkansas Basin that I think the numbers that you see are a bit biased because of the conservative nature that the municipalities in the basin took on after the 2002-2003 drought. So they're really cautious and careful to maintain a large amount of storage. Agricultural water wise, the storage volumes are really pretty low. John Martin Reservoir is more of an indicator where you see pure agricultural water, except for a little bit of permanent fishery pool water in that reservoir, and it's dropped down to around 44,000 acre feet. It's a 330,000 acre foot reservoir. So storage for agriculture is pretty low in the basin, even though the overall storage seems to be better because of municipalities maintaining quite a bit in storage.
Thank you, Bill. Cindy, do you have any updates?
I don't really have a lot of updates, although I think it was last week one of my rancher colleagues had posted a picture of their ranch down near Pritchett in Baca County they'd gotten 1.8 inches of rain, and dry creeks were now flowing pretty well, and they've been pretty happy. Several of the ranchers that I work with down there have been reporting pretty nice precipitation. I don't have a lot of other updates, I'm sorry, beyond that little corner of the state, but keeping my ears open.
That's great, thank you. Anyone from CSU? I don't see anyone with CSU right now. We, that said, we do have a big meeting this afternoon with the Ag Impact Task Force, so I am going to incorporate some updates into the regular monthly drought report from that meeting. So we might, it might be a little more just procedural how to move forward this summer, but if there's important updates, I'll include that in the one-pager drought update that always follows this meeting. The That said, there's time here for some open discussion. We are just on track with the agenda. So are there any just hanging concerns or observations from the field that anyone would like to share with the group? Okay. Really appreciate everyone's participation today. Peter, thank you again. Brian, thank you for the presentations. These are really helpful each month, and the more I hear you all describe the nuances and in these different graphics, the easier it is to understand just how the next week or next few months might look. So these are really helpful. We will share this presentation as always online on CWCB site. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. We're going to be adding a significant amount of information to the CWCB website. That's CWCB, or it's cwcb.colorado.gov/drought. And that's been on my to-do list for a minute, but we'll get that up really soon. So any last parting words? Otherwise, you all are free for take back your 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. Good
Thanks,
job.
Megan.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, John. Bye.